I think that 5th edition is a pretty good game, even though third parties do happen to beat out Wizards of the Coast on almost everything that they publish. Now, the good thing about D&D is that a lot of people play it. It is definitively the most mainstream tabletop RPG, but there's just some things that it can't do. Wizards of the Coast's 5th edition is a meaty book to learn. D&D only players have no idea how easy it can be to learn a new system. And this is why I hope that the people who clicked on this video are 5e only players who actually want to dip their toes into something. First thing I'm going to talk about really is why you should even try another system. In general, if you've fallen into any of these sort of traps per se, I'd say it's time to take a look. If you use a lot of homebrew in your games, and I'm talking like a lot, but I mean if you're homebrewing to the point where you're changing a ton of game mechanics, maybe it might be time to take another look. Now, this I definitely would try to recommend maybe something like Pathfinder, maybe something like looking at a different D&D edition, maybe one of those like sort of D&D alternatives such as like DC 20, Dungeon Crawl Classics if you want something a little bit more old school. That's not really what I'm going to talk about in this video, so if this is you, you might want to take a look at another video because I'm not specifically going to go over any sort of like D&D replacements. Now, the second reason is a big one, and if you do this, I highly recommend that you check out another system and that you watch the rest of this video, because I was exactly like this. Whether you're playing some sort of weird sci-fi D&D mashup or some crazy cyberpunk conversion or Fallout conversion, I think that you should just try to read up on another book or watch the rest of this video, and maybe you might find something that is in your sort of niche. Or maybe you're just bored of 5e. If fighting a bunch of goblins or kobolds or trying to find an evil wizard in an abandoned cave doesn't really sound as exciting as it did the first time, maybe it's time that you take a look at a different RPG instead of just trying to start a new campaign that you'll eventually get bored of and fizzle out. So that brings us to the question, what game or games should you actually try? First, I want to start with this game called Fiasco. This game is going to be wildly different from D&D, and that's why I'm putting it first. So there are two additions to this game. One is dice and book oriented. It's considered Fiasco Classic Edition, and you can pick this up for about $8, I think. And the other is the box edition. This one you can get, I think, under $30 on Amazon. I decided to go with this edition because I was going to be playing it with my usual D&D group, plus one member who has never really played a tabletop RPG. So I decided, you know what, the streamlined card edition might be the better idea. And it honestly is. Now, the game is mainly composed of scenes, which are parts of the game where you and another player will be role-playing with each other, with the scene focused on at least one of the players. Also, there's no sort of GM in this game. I think this game would severely lose out on a lot of like the randomness and fun of collaborative storytelling if it had a GM. The box edition of the game comes with an engine deck, this cute little board for you to put stuff on, and it also comes with 3 different playsets, which are sort of like settings. These playsets are just a small deck of cards with a bunch of locations, objects, and relationships for players to put between themselves. Anybody can pick up and play this game, whether it be your usual D&D group or a friend who has never even heard of what an RPG is. You guys will love it. Now, when I heard people say it quickly devolves into a Coen Brothers movie, I didn't really believe them. I had no idea how such a simply designed game could actually like sort of put itself on this dark humor course. But trust me, it gets there, and it gets there so naturally you won't even notice it. This game is really easy to learn. Take a look at this rulebook. It's about 24 pages in total. By the way, I forgot to mention the game is not meant for any sort of like multi-session campaigns. It's just meant to be like a one-shot. It has a definitive ending. It concludes with a bunch of like positive and negative cards. I didn't really talk about them, but honestly, just check the game out. It's a lot of fun. An RPG you've probably heard of is Call of Cthulhu, and Call of Cthulhu is a bit closer to D&D in terms of the amount of rules that you have to learn. It's also a bit closer to D&D in terms of the amount of books that you have to buy, because, woof, that's quite a bit of books there. It's a little bit more intensive to learn because the book is a bit bigger, especially compared to something like Fiasco, for example, but it's still like not too difficult. If you learn D&D, you can learn Call of Cthulhu. In terms of the core dice system, it just relies on these 2 dice. I don't know if you can see them. I hope you can. It's just a percentile roll under system. You have a 76% chance. You just roll the dice and see if you got under 76. I got 80. The cool thing about it is that you have tiers of success, such as like hard successes and like critical successes. I'll put the scale here somewhere in the video. Your character sheet is a little bit more involved. I recommend just using the form fillable PDF that they provide you. It just fills it out all for you. The game also relies on this thing called the sanity mechanic. As you do things that sort of unveil the Cthulhu mythos, you will start to lose sanity, and when you completely lose it, you lose control of your character and they have just gone crazy, essentially. If you like Lovecraft, you're gonna like the RPG. There's obvious like direct influences, and the Cthulhu mythos is literally the basis of the entire game. So if you like that, you'll definitely be a fan of the game. So you just heard those 2 games. Maybe you don't want something as super rules light and casual as Fiasco, and maybe you don't want something as like hardcore and whole new system as Call of Cthulhu. So then, let's take a look at this other RPG, Skate Wizards. Skate Wizards is an amazing game. It is a very small, like, look at that. It's only about like 40 pages. Reading this RPG is just a great time. It's also pretty cheap. It was $15 for the design, 2 character sheets, some stickers, and a Bandcamp code to download the official soundtrack of the game. I think Skate Wizards is just a really good time, specifically because of its quick but existent character creation. As mentioned, there are character sheets in this game, and they're really simple. Again, half page size, just generally really simple with like little doodles on there. I mean, take a look at that. This character sheet just has personality oozing in it. The game is a 2d6 system and roll over, so you roll 2d6, you add your modifiers, and then you see if you roll over the number 10. Overall, this game is great. I really enjoy it, especially elements such as your skateboard being so tied to your wizard that they actually share the same HP. So if your skateboard breaks, you get turned into a poser. Whether or not your wizard is immortal, you still get turned into a poser. There's permanent spells where you can create a sidewalk, a guardrail, or some sort of like ramp at any time, and this just allows for your players to get crazy combos in. The game basically just leaves the entirety of it up to the GM and player discretion. But the initiative and movement mechanic didn't really make a lot of sense to my 2 coworkers that actually ended up playing it with me. So it is a little bit contrived, but generally I think that this game is still a really fun time just because of all the crazy stuff that you can do in it. There's like these things called bootleg spells, which are like tapes that your skate wizard plays to cast a spell, and then you roll to see if it breaks afterwards. Overall, the game is just so much fun. Please check it out. Now we talked about Call of Cthulhu, which is a big book to learn like D&D, and we talked about really like rules light stuff like Fiasco and Skate Wizards. Let's say you want something that's like a happy middle ground. You still want some nice character sheets, stuff that's involved, really about like the role play, but still like some stat crunching and stuff like that. Well, I highly recommend that you check out Blades in the Dark, specifically because it kind of changes the flavor, whereas like D&D and even Call of Cthulhu are more about just straight up killing your enemies. Blades in the Dark is set in a setting where you aren't supposed to kill people. It's set in an industrial fantasy city with sort of like 19th century tech. There's trains, there's steam engines, stuff like that. The game is generally about like planning these heists against these rich people, against these powerful people, getting money, and just generally being, well, a thief. One of my favorite features about the system, and this is kind of like the core of it, is you have this like sort of currency that you can like spend, sort of like an inspiration is the best way I can refer to it in D&D terms. And it's basically this currency where you can spend it to make things that happen in the game basically undo themselves. And this lets you basically override what your GM is saying, and it gives the game such like a movie heist plan sort of vibe. And it also just makes it a lot more fun, both for the players and the GM, to sort of see the way that they can hurdle around situations. Now the GM might not like getting his plans like interrupted, but I think this just encourages the GM to throw things at players that they wouldn't normally throw in other RPGs, because now they can retcon things. Overall, Blades in the Dark is a fun time if you're trying to go with like a really stealthy RPG and you want a more like grounded setting. It is still fantasy, but it's got like an industrial vibe to it, and it's really just its own thing. It even sprang its own engine called Forged in the Dark, and this got a bunch of like other games to sort of adopt the Blades in the Dark main core gameplay. Alright, so we talked about a number of TTRPGs, some that are more built for campaigns, some that are exclusively one-shots, and some that are kind of in between, that you can run multiple times and just really enjoy them with your friends in the way that you want to. But let's say you want something a little bit more familiar of the D&D tradition. You want something that is going to be long form, going to last for years, take you on the campaign of your life. This is why I recommend Lancer. This is a big book, as you can probably hear. Lancer allows you to become a mech pilot who takes control of this really customizable, insanely high-tech mech, with varying frames and a ton of different weapons to put on it. Lancer really allows you to get into the customization and gives players a lot of room for experimentation with its systems. Now, this is kind of what Lancer specializes at. It's a combat-focused game. Please don't let this be your introduction into either RPGs in general, or if you've played D&D, introduction to other RPGs. Because it is a big book, it's a lot to learn, but the systems are definitely worth it. One thing I want to mention about Lancer though, is that there's just amazing art for it. I mean, the mech designs are just straight up beautiful, and the other art pieces just really invoke its setting, which is a far future in which a galactic power known as Union seeks to, well, unify humanity and create peace among them. Humanity is sparse around so many planets, creating colonies all the time, which Union will attempt to unify and bring together to pave the way for this new age of humanity. One that is under the same rule and only seeks to benefit itself. When disagreements occurs, which can often happen with colonies being isolationist, Union tries every single peaceful solution before finally resorting to their ultimate weapon, the Lancers. What I love about Lancer is that its HP system is kind of just layers and layers, where you have structure damage, you'll take that structure damage, and then you'll go down, and then it'll sort of like reboot itself, but you might get permanent or like semi-permanent damages to your mech. One crazy helpful thing about Lancer though is its completely free virtual compendium. It's called CompCon, and you can visit it right now and start learning about the system. Best part is that player side, it is completely free, including the supplements. CompCon is crazy useful. It works on computers, it works on phones and tablets because it's just a web app. If you're someone who plays TTRPGs exclusively online, I highly recommend checking out Lancer, specifically because it works well as a virtual tabletop role-playing game. One thing to mention about this game though is its relationship to its setting. Now, where D&D, you can basically set it in any sort of medieval fantasy world and can absolutely adapt certain things, and D&D itself has setting books that change it. Lancer is kind of stuck in the one Lancer setting, and if you're not a big fan of it, I think you should just try a different role-playing game, because trying to homebrew this into a different setting is going to be a whole other question. Overall, Lancer is an RPG that I highly recommend that you try out if you're looking for a combat-heavy game and are ready to learn something big and engage in a long-term campaign. So that about wraps up this list of TTRPGs that I think you should play, especially if you've only played D&D before. But yeah, just thank you so much for watching if you made it to this point. It's been a long time since I've made a YouTube video of this format, and it's about something that I haven't talked about on this channel before. I really hope I can turn this into a series and possibly even increase the production value of this, but at the same time, I just wanted to talk about some of my favorite tabletop role-playing games, and I think that you should check them out.